All right, welcome. This is Greg Chambers. As you know, I keep the video off lately just because it's embarrassing to look at myself. But we're about to start here the U.S. Farm data 5 ways to make your email campaigns to farmers and ranchers more powerful. And I'm flying solo today, so I'm hoping you can hear me. I'll try to monitor the chat, but I tend to look at my note cards more than that. And then if you have any Q&A, there's a little Q&A button. You can ask a question inside of that. But email still alive and kicking. I was looking through my email boxes this morning because I was trying to find a good example of when we say it's alive and kicking, what do I mean? My 77-year-old mom, bless her heart, her last email she sent me was forward bumper sticker. That was the subject line. And then this morning, I actually got one from my 17-year-old nephew. So thank you, Uncle Greg. Subject line and entire message. But it was his birthday yesterday, and we zipped him a little Amazon gift card. So from right there, a difference of 60 years, and they're both communicating. Certainly, they found that communicating with me is probably easier via email. So it's still a common tool, good communication. Plus, when I looked at a recent survey, it said that up to 90% of farmers have a smartphone. So when we think of people that are on mobile devices, always trying to develop that killer app, I've maintained for a long time, I think email is kind of the killer app. It's the one thing that people hook up right away. Even my technophobic wife, the first thing she did was hook up her Gmail and her work email so that she could look at her emails on the phone. And so knowing that, it's intimate, right? It's the easiest way to get into that little tiny device that most people are looking at. And so with that in mind, let's jump into what we're going to cover today. So today's agenda is pretty simple. We're going to try to make ourselves a little wiser by defining some terms, just making sure that we're both on the same page, and that I am not using terms differently than you, or even if I am using terms differently than you would normally use them, you can see what it is. Since this is a one-way show, you can see what it is that where I'm coming from. And I'm going to share 5 ways to get more from email campaigns, 5 ways that we've used around here. I've got emails going back I was trying to dig up all my oldest emails, and it looks like there's a big gap where I missed a bunch of email. And I think it may be in an old Outlook folder, but and then there was a dead spot like 2008 to 2010. But for the most part, I think I have the Gmail unlimited storage holds way too many emails, and they're all in there. And then we'll summarize and go. But first, if there's any questions, use the chat window is probably the easiest way to do it, and just send any questions in there, or you can use that Q&A. Up to this point, nobody's ever used the Q&A, so I don't know if it works. But if there's something that you're dying for me to cover or to get an opinion on, or you just want to give me some homework and to get back in touch with you, that's the place to do it. So when we pop into this, before we get too far into it, although email is the killer app, it does have its challenges. This article just came to me about 10 days ago, and why are there so many suckers, right? Is the question they're asking. And we all have heard, okay, how is it that these Nigerian print scams, how do they still work? Well, the cost of sending email is so low, and you can send so many that the response rate doesn't have to be very good, right? In order to generate a return on investment. That being said, we all get lumped into the same box. And the article was interesting because this article and articles that are like it, they describe both the problem and the opportunity, right? The problem being we've got people trying to take advantage of us, and it's a low-cost medium to do that. It's way more expensive to send direct mail, but at the same time, when they send so much spam, it makes it hard for real messages to get through. So what these scientists did is they went to I think it was Los Angeles County Police Department, and they got into the scam department and pulled all these emails that were and tried to segment them, tried to figure out what it was that was making these emails effective. And so in there is always good information, right? The one thing when they went through and they found the people that they could fool, so they had a test group, and they were trying to fool this test group. And when they were able to be successful, it was generally because the people recognize the brand. So branding wins. And we know this as marketers. But at the same time, it's interesting to see how it works in there. So if it was from Costco or from Bank of America, they tended to be more effective than unknown. I'm an unknown prince that just happens to have $1 million that I need to hide in the US. The other one was that people struggle with numbers and math. So the people that were taken in by the scam, or at least started to click through them, they tended to overestimate the actual opportunity. So a Publishers Clearinghouse was another one that was in there. And so, and we know this too, right? It goes back to that old marketing textbook, buy one, get one free polls better than 50% off. People just don't like to do math. So something good to keep in mind. And then probably the most important one was that the vast majority of people didn't get fooled. So out of I think it was 400 participants, most of the participants never got anywhere they recognized it as spam right away and dumped it out. So they kill scams quickly. And knowing that though, that's kind of the theme of this webinar is email is such a relatively old medium that people make quick judgments. So if you hear me shuffling in the background, those are my note cards. So let's get on the same page. One of the terms that I'm going to use quite a bit here is segmenting. And when I talk about segmenting, it's just dividing your list, right? So if you're looking for the quickest lift in revenue, 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear this advice. Divide your list, break it up into something. So if this is all your emails, right, we want to break them up into some unit. So just that homework alone seems to take a lot of our clients, and it's extra work. So I don't have time to do that. I'm just going to kind of aim for the big pile on the left. But if you can use, this is the simplest way to segment a list. If we're going to do it, is basically like, I know you or I don't know you, right? So people that know you already, they either buy from you now, have bought from you, or they're at least familiar with your brand. And then there's a whole nother group of people who, if they don't know you, are we connected at all? Do we have anything in common? Or they've never heard of us, right? And so just inside of there's 6 segments that we can play with. I used to run an apparel company, and we sold Hawaiian shirts and t-shirts. And so these are actually our segments. Ours were even simpler. It was people who bought, people who didn't buy, and then it was people who bought and were interested in tropical shirts, or people who were interested in t-shirts. But by just being able to segment, we were able to get a lift. So when I talk about segmenting, that's what I'm referring to, is taking your list and trying to find some way to break them into smaller units that you can communicate with differently. I talk a lot, or I will probably cover preview panes. And when I talk about that, that's just, what do you see when you first log in? This is supposed to be Outlook. That's Gmail. At least that's the version I could find online. This is what my Gmail inbox looks like. But basically, this is the first step, right? With any email marketing that we're doing, this is what you see. So I like to say it's important, because you don't want to plan a party if nobody's going to, don't go through and hire the band if nobody's going to come to your party. So the way to mess around with this is go around. It's fascinating. Every new hire that comes into our office, the first thing they'll notice is that we hover around and we try to see how is it that they use email and how they sort it. Just because we want to learn, right? We know how we do things. We can't assume that everybody does them the exact same way, but it is, I'm always interested in these preview panes. Oh, I guess I even had some arrows in there for you. I'm going to talk about testing. When I use the word testing, what I'm talking about is, we use this quote around here: "In God we trust, everyone else bring data." And the reason we focus on testing so much is because we know that just being a little bit better adds up. So 1% better on every email that we send leads to 100% in 70 emails, right? The magic of compound interest. So we start with basic A/B testing, a control versus treatment. So like these webinar emails, I don't know if you could go back and analyze any webinar email that you've received from us, but we are testing a few different things in each one that we do, because we're just trying to get a little bit better, trying to break through the clutter as we go through. So testing, when I refer to any of these things, this is what I'm referring to, is that we are doing some of the testing. And then finally, the big part of this email is that when it's broadcasting versus prospecting. Lately, there's been a lot of, I get a lot. I just got one today. Is it okay if we meet at 11? I think, no, I've got a webinar. But the prospecting emails, they're coming through. So what we're going to be talking about, though, is more broadcasting than prospecting. So if broadcasting, think of it as a message to many, a newsletter is what we'll be discussing on this. But prospecting, individual prospecting, like something a sales development rep would do where they're reaching out, that won't be covered, but I will put a little piece on at the end. So while they're different, prospecting as individual emails, you'll find that we've found over time that those emails are much more effective. And so we try to treat every broadcast email as an individual one-on-one interaction, even though it's going to a group. So the best emails these days, and the reason I know this is because I was actually attending an email seminar as to a guy has a very popular newsletter, and he was trying to describe why it is that he thinks his newsletter is popular. So this is, of course, anecdotal because it's his opinion as to why his email list is popular. However, what was interesting is that it's kind of like over the years I've noticed, that like comedy, for instance, has gone into just very self-revelatory. It's just how deep into my life can I get where I can be funny, which is a lot different than I think than like early, Seinfeld, 1980s type content that was coming out before. So anymore, that's what we see about like popular newsletters too. So prospecting one-on-one, you might share something like that, but would you broadcast that? I don't know. So we will, when I'm talking about one-on-one, that's what I'm talking about. So sometimes it's good to cover yourself. So that puts us on the same page. As Socrates says, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. We are probably not going to get wise from that last page, but we're at least on the same page. So with that in mind, here's the 5 ways I'm going to cover this. And I see that there's a question there. I will cover that question as we go along. These are the 5 ways. So it's a process. We'll talk about troubleshooting. That's what that is. Which group are you in? School is just starting. I was mowing the lawn, and the little girls in the backyard, our conversation, they're just starting grade school. So our conversation this last week was centered around, do they know who their teachers are yet? So have they been segmented? Have they been put into their little group for the year? So we'll talk about which group are you in. Hi, Bob, we'll talk about personalization and the challenges there. Too much is just a quick covering sending. How much is too much when it comes to sending? And then Kickass Users. We'll talk about making people awesome. And then we also have a +1 that I'll add at the end. But with that in mind, let's jump into testing. Testing, the easiest way to think about this is it's a process, not an event, right? So when we say test, it gets complex. It can get complex quickly. People start to get into, version 8, multivariate testing, A/B testing, multivariate regression analysis. That's one of my favorites. Just to say, and which, what's the best way to test and how do we do this? Because it gets so complicated, do we test the creative? Do we test the copy? Do we test the call to action? How do we test all those things at once? What we find is that a lot of our clients don't test at all. So when faced with that, right, let's at least keep it simple. And the easiest way to keep it simple is to go back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, which was the Nigerian scams. With the way people work through scam emails, do they recognize who it's from, right? Do they is the subject line something of interest to them? And then in those preview panes, so looking at the preview where you can see it, especially in corporate emails, there's still a lot of corporate emails that default to not loading images. So before we do all the breakdown of the creative and how good is it that and does it work, the first things to test are really who's it coming from, and have you been testing different people from? Sometimes the email from from Greg Chambers is better than the email from US Farm Data, for instance. And this does get kind of into the spam rules with blank email broadcast or blanket email broadcasting. Yeah, I'll have to address. There's a question on the floor, and it's about email spam rules and blanket email broadcasting, and I'll cover that a little bit more. But that gets into this, right? It needs to get into the inbox so that people can even see who it's from, so you can read the subject line in the preview pane. One of our clients, which is not an ag client, but they were a T-shirt company, Old Guys Rule, and we were helping them with some email marketing. And they, if you've never bumped into this brand, it's called Old Guys Rule, and it's really just about stuff old guys like to do. So it's like cars, fishing, barbecues, and then little old like dad jokes. If you think of dad jokes, you pretty much got the Old Guys Rule brand down. And one of the things is their graphics are really great. And so we'd spend, or they were spending all this time on the email graphic, getting it through. But what we were finding is just by using this, who is it from? We tested a few different froms that wasn't providing any lift. We tested a few subject lines that wasn't providing a lift. But then when we got to the preview pane, the image, it was the alt tag. So before the images were loaded, when we repeated the offers or what exactly the names of the t-shirts were, because the t-shirts were really funny, in the alt tags, what we found was that gave the open lift and it gave the click-through lift, which led to the real lift, what they were after, which is more sales. So when it comes to testing, it's a process, and then the simpler the process internally. This is an internal one that we use, because if we can get through this before we get into everything else, we can at least get a little bit better before we start getting into trying to design multivariate regression analysis or multivariate testing on that. So that's testing. Oh. All right, segmenting. Which group are you in? And is it, where it happens here is that when people are sending blanket emails, right? Sending to a large group, relevancy takes hold, right? So if you're sending to the big list on top, coming up with a message that fits all of them is a challenge. So we say segment it, right? And that sounds easy, except for that now we need to come up with 5 different messages in this case. And so no one fights me on the idea of segmenting, but because it's hard to connect broad content across everybody. So I'm trying to think of a good example on this. So when what we say is we need to talk to an individual segment, and the reason we know, like even before we could just test this internally, the reason we know this works is because, I can send an email from, again, let's just use US Farm Data as an example. We send the email from info at US Farm Data, but, and we can see what gets read. But then if we send an individual email, like Bill Matern, the CEO, if he sends an email, it tends to get read and it tends to get a response rate back to it. So knowing that, if we can narrow the segment right, if we can narrow the messaging, that's the challenge. So if we split this into buyers, non-buyers, or recent purchasers versus past purchasers, and can think of ways that makes them different, then we can speak to each one individually. So we have a client, as an example, who is in equipment leasing. They love to send the all customer email, just the updates. This is what's going on in the company, this and that. And what they're really coming up with, they're coming to us because they had content challenges. And we asked, how would we separate them? Through that conversation, where the only people who could give us a little bit of information were the salespeople, because the salespeople were like, listen, I just want to know the people who are within a year of their term ending, because those are the people that we want to talk to. So we continued that broad email, just informational emails that they were sending out. We just tried to increase the frequency of those. But then we also went through and started segmenting anybody who was near. We could put in their termination date of when the lease was ending, and then we could work backwards from that to come up with the segment. And that segment, the easiest way to describe it is that you may be thinking, you may be considering, because they found, the salespeople thought this is a good place for us to be in that conversation. And it turns out it was. So that's where the lift is. But the challenge in all this is making sure that you get people into a group and testing messages inside of the group. It doesn't need to be so much extra work, because that generally is the challenge, is that people say, oh, yeah, it's just so much extra work. But if we can just noodle around with what is it when we separate people from like an old customer from a new customer, where is that division? And then hunt around. The knowledge is generally inside your own company, inside the marketing department, inside your salespeople's heads, inside the customer service people. They know how to, if you gave them the segment, they could describe how they would change their message in between. And that's what you should do too there. So that's segmenting, which is number 2. So far we've covered 2 of these. One was testing. The second one was segmenting. And this one is personalization. So there is, every marketer out there is being told that you need to personalize. Personalization is, so I guess personalization would be the next holy grail. I've been using the word holy grail a lot today, but it is, right? It's out there. And the reason is because personalization works, kind of like the example I gave of a note from the CEO coming directly to you via email. Right? We all know to check, does it have an unsubscribe at the bottom? Does it look like it really came from this guy's personal email address? How should I respond to it? Anytime that it's personalized like that, it just lifts responses. But we don't want to confuse one-to-one, like personalization. What I find is people confuse it with like a mail merge and just saying, oh, if it says Greg in there, that's going to provide a lift. I will tell you from testing that it really does provide a lift. So that's good, but you need to be cautious. And the example is right there. Right? It works until it doesn't. And Tableau. So here's a data visualization company, if you've not bumped into them. It's a piece of software that we use. And for this conference, so this CPI Corporation is my, I call it Chambers Pivot Industries, but it's my little business. And it's in their database because I'm a customer of theirs. So I registered for this conference. They called, I confirmed. I think I had to confirm via email. They were really like, are you really going to be there? And then when I get to check in, Greg Chambers, he says, hey, Greg, and the little printer prints the thing, the cool sticker out right in front of me. And it's there. And you could see it on his face because he could see it too. CPI Corp out of business. So obviously whoever tried to get in touch with me before couldn't get in touch with me. So in the company name field, they put out of business, but they didn't remove me from the database. Who knows? The only reason I bring this up is because Tableau loves data. This is their world. So the question is, how strong is your data game? When you're trying to do personalization, make sure your data game is strong. Segmenting qualifies in my book as personalization. So keep that in mind when you're doing it. And yes, a mail merge does work so that you can always address it to, hello, Greg. But at the same time, make sure there's somebody double checking all those fields so that you don't send it to, hello, out of business. Maybe it was pressing it, right? All right, what about this? Too much testing. This is all about quantity of emails, testing quantity of emails. So we talk about testing all the time. And when we are coming up with these tests, I get asked a lot about what's the best time to send. And I say, I don't know. It's like asking, how long is a piece of string? It's like, I don't really have a good answer for that. I need more information. But the one thing I can say with certainty is that besides segmenting, there's not a lot of testing that goes on as to how many emails are too many emails, right? And I understand why, because nobody wants to be the spammy guy who is sending too many emails. But it is a great test because of outcomes. It may lift the number of leads that you're getting. So if you're sending an email a month, sending 12 more emails this year could lift your response rate, right? That 1% better each time. Plus, there's this whole world of impressions, right? We talk about people being bombarded with information, bombarded with data these days. The rule of 30 was, I may need to update this, but it does say that it takes 10 impressions of a message, right, from you before it starts to get through to the prospect that you're trying to get in front of. And then the rule of 30 was always our internal moniker for it, you know, and then plan on most messages just don't get through. So how do you get in front of somebody 30 times without being a pain in the butt? The way you do it is you have to bring value, right? So we may subscribe to the rule of 30, and we may say we're going to double the number of emails that we want to send this year, especially if it's a low number, like we're only sending 1 email a month. And the reason we're doing it is because we're trying to lift the leads, but don't bring it unless you're bringing value. If you're sending the same email over and over again, right? Buy now, buy now, buy now. Like the example I think of that is Nordstrom. Like every time I buy something from one of the big, like a Nordstrom's or something, it's amazing the number of emails that I get. I swear one of them was sending immediately after, they sent me like 2 a day. So somebody in there was testing something and I was the poor sap who was getting it. But then when I tried to unsubscribe, it was like, oh, sorry, is twice a day too many, Greg? Saks Fifth Avenue or whatever it was. How about once a week or this and that? Okay, so the good news is at least somebody was testing. And if you're not sending 2 a day, there's probably a big upper limit of where you could be testing it. And the reason we know that is because we've been messing around with the tool Conversica. It's a robot, for lack of a better word, but it's some artificial intelligence where it follows up to set appointments. And we know internally that our humans will follow up a couple times to set an appointment with somebody. But with the robot, the nice thing, and this natural language processing artificial intelligence robot, you can program it to do 10 times, but the results are that it gets appointments up. The trick seems to be is that they're not pre-programmed with the exact same message, right? So and if anybody responds, the robot can parse out what that response is and keep the conversation moving until a human being can jump into it. So my point on the whole thing is that that there's a big difference between a human following up twice, maybe twice, thinking that they followed up twice, and then the robot who keeps after you. And is, have you had a chance to talk to Greg yet? Have you had a chance to learn about our services? So the result, we're just trying to get leads up. And if you're trying to use email to get the number of leads up, test your upper limit of how many emails that you send. So there you go. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 down. So this comes up to number 5, Kickass Users. I'm looking to make sure I am on this. So when it comes to questions of value, so this was based off of when I finished the last part, right? It was that if you're going to send more emails, then you need to make sure you're bringing value in each of those emails. And the one piece is you don't always have to be selling that. Buy now. What else can you offer that helps your users kick ass? So the competition in the inbox is hard, and you just want to make sure that you don't suck. So if you start by asking, will this help my users kick butt? That's usually a good place when it comes to discerning what's good and what's bad content. So I have a newsletter, the Chambers Pivot newsletter, and there's 2 sections in it that are strictly related to just trying to help you do your job better. So it's geared towards management, sales management. And then there's one section that's full of personal stories because it's my attempt at trying to be Dave Barry or something like that. And the comments that come, they're always on the stories. And so if I were looking at that personalization, like, oh, they just want to know more about me, that is one group in there. But the ones that the responses that I'm more interested in are the ones that become new inquiries and new clients for me. And when I look through that, it is always in response to one of the hints I've given, a management tool, a mantra that they can use with their people that helps them sell more. That hint given, right? And it's always, if you think in terms of answering the question of if you were my best, if I were trying to help you and you were a good friend of mine, what is it? Like, what insider information can I give you that would help you do your job better. And if you're doing that with your prospects, with your customers, as you're trying to sell them more information, that's the easiest way to discern what's valuable, what's not valuable, as you're trying to increase the number of emails that you send over time. So easy thing to talk about. And then the harder thing is coming up with the actual content. But at least if you're asking this question, will this help my users be kick-ass? Then you know you're on the right track. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I promised I was going to give a bonus. And the reason was the bonus, and I actually used this morning, is I'm going to just give you some actual language that you can use on these emails today. So this is, if you are getting into segmenting and if you can take your list and say, this is my existing customers, they're in this group A, and this is my cold list outreach, people I have no evidence that they purchased from me, put them in group B. This is what I'm about to give you are quick hits you can try once. They tend to work one time. You can't do them over and over and over again, but you can do them with, like, as people get added to the segment, you can try with them again. And so most of us are looking for more information from our existing customer list. An email directly from somebody in management that is out to the list, that all it says is this is super effective. I need a favor. I'm trying to learn more about what my ag customers are interested in. Could you answer a few questions for me? The trick on the questions, and I say a few, is it can't be 20 questions. Don't link to a survey. Just ask for 2 pieces of information that you think would be helpful. What publications do you read? What trade shows do you attend? Something like that could be a piece of information. You'll get a high response rate when it's an individualized email that you send like that. It works, but if you keep sending it over and over again, they tend not to answer over time, right? It's like anything else. But you can try that today, and it will help you. You'll have new information on your customers before the weekend. Now, cold list outreach, I just did this one again this morning. I was looking for, we were reaching out to a new customer that we didn't exactly get referred to. It was a low-level referral, right? A salesperson said, "Oh, it's marketing who handles that." And yeah, I'm like, "Oh, can we tell them we talked to you?" And they're like, "No, no, I'd rather you didn't." So we did a cold list outreach. And so inside this language does work. I apologize for interrupting, but it's the same thought, right? It's coming from an individual talking to an individual, even though it's going to a group of people. And it's basically following this. You customize it for yourself. But I'm Greg Chambers, US Farm Data, and we believe we discovered a breakthrough, a lead generation tool for farm and ranch. I like to schedule 20 minutes to share how we help, and when I say your customers, I guess it's we help our customers get a result, and then how we guarantee it, and can we schedule a time to talk. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't gone through and deleted pieces of this to figure out which part works, but from the conversations, it seems to be the guarantee is the interesting part of that email. Again, can you use this over and over again? No. You can probably plug it into anybody who's new into the segment to see if you can get an appointment. But like anything, right? You get responses on that top email. It's personalized 1 out of 10 easily, if not 1 out of 2. And then on the cold list outreach is going to be more like 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30 to get any response on that. So it's kind of, but that makes sense, right? It's like, especially knowing about the scam emails and things that we're dealing with, that's where where we need to be able to work our own internal numbers on that. So that was it. That's the summary of the 5. Troubleshooting, it's a process, right? Keep your process simple when you are doing troubleshooting, when you're starting on testing. When you are segmenting, the goal there is make sure that you've made lists that you can vary your approach, and you know why it is that somebody is in one list and not in the other list, and what would make them different. Personalize your campaigns, but watch the name cheat part, watch the mail merge. Send more emails, and the way to do that is to add value, try to add more value in each of those emails. And then the way to add more value is often to send non-promotional emails, help them do their job better. So I will send you the slides. Okay, so now getting around email, spam rules in broadcasting, we still believe in, and now I'm going to try to answer this Q&A. So the question is, how are you getting around the email spam rules in blanket email broadcasting? And there's, on the technical side, we make sure that we have our SPF, the sender policy framework in place. We use a clean domain when we're sending. And then we need to, when you say blanket email broadcasting, it could be, you would like to answer this question? Oh, see, I've never played with this before. Anonymous attendee who asked this question, but it says I'm going to answer this question live. But so on the technical side, we're just trying to make sure that it's in there. Now the list, so the biggest challenge you have with spam rules, or that we have internally with spam rules, is it always comes down to the origin of the list. And right, it's it's the origin of the list, but even with a list that is notoriously hard to email, i.e. lawyers, when it comes, I bought a list of email from you, we wanted to email them as cold prospects. Oh, okay, so we got another, so if you purchase an email list from US Farm Data and you wanted to email them as cold prospects, we would love to mix them in with as a group sending. But the way we're getting around this is our list itself has already been, we've used an email testing service to keep up the deliverability. That being said, it's just the toughest list to work with. So we also want to work towards response rate. So if we know what the response rate is that we're working towards, we start with a large group of emails, not sending to all of them all at once, and then testing the messages, because it does come back to that. Who's it from? What's the message in the subject line? What does the preview pane look like? And then what is the call to action? And if we can tie that into a larger campaign, a one-time email is super hard to get. We've just not figured that out. I'm sure there's some people out there that are really good at that, where you can take a cold email list and they can gin up some response from it. But what we found is just using the old direct marketing approach of, over time, this is what a full campaign is going to run us. And this is the response rate that we're after. And this is how we would know that we're generating a positive return on investment, right? So what is our cost per lead? What is our cost per acquisition? And working through those. But the way we do it is we still do on the technical end, we've tested. We also double checked with a couple email providers to make sure we're not pulling something for you that has, they call them these spam honeypots, where they're trying to catch you. So they put these email addresses out there, and then that way you get everything spammed. The email addresses are as good as we can get them. The challenge for us is they're basically a segment of people who have not heard from you before. If you're a great big brand and people have heard from you before, then guess what? You tend to get a lot less spam complaints. I'm not sure if that is answering your question all the way, but if you have more questions, you can always, if I do send these people without permission, am I risking getting in trouble? Well, so yeah, so the question is, if you're going to buy emails from us, are you risking getting in trouble as send spam? We're risking, we take on the risk if we're sending it. If you buy the emails and deploy them yourselves, yes, you are taking a risk. So hopefully you're good at it. But if you have any questions, challenges, you should really work through us. So again, we can get into more details for you offline, as well as how we work through and try to make it work for you. But thank you. It was a great question. Parting gifts. We're going to, when we send you the recording, we'll send you the slides. We'll also send you a book I wrote on the Human Beings Guide to Business Growth, which kind of touches, thank you, I got the phone number, and we will give you a call. And then we'll send you the perfect growth formula. It's a great way to have a structured conversation internally that helps marketing. And then we'll introduce you to Lead Gen Compass. So a lot of what I was just describing with the emails applies to this new tool that we're doing, Lead Gen Compass, where we're trying to incorporate a few more tools together to help you increase your response and the number of leads that you generate. You can reach us, usfarmdata.com. If you want to see what Lead Gen Compass is, you can go sign up for that at leadgencompass.com. By all means, give us a call on that number or send an email to info@usfarmdata.com. My name is Greg Chambers. Bill Matern is he's the big boss. So use our names and talk to us. And if there's nothing else, thank you for attending. I hope this was useful. In general, the feedback I get is that it is, and I'll send you the recording. Our graphic person is out, so it'll probably come out. The recording will come to you on Monday. Take care, and thanks a lot.